All right.
I'm riding with tomorrow on my car.
So, I know we've had a little bit of a disjointed couple of weeks since I was gone last week on Thursday, so Dr. Morelli came in and talked about relationship selling. Just a reminder that there's a Dropbox open. It'll be open until tonight at midnight for your critical thinking challenge on justice and professional sales and why it's important for professional selling. So you'll want to try and do as well as you can on the critical thinking challenges because again, the tests tend to be somewhat difficult in this class. And I say this not to scare you, but to give you an idea of how to approach the exam. So this is a 3,000 level class. It's not a 1,000 level class, and so what we want you to do in this class, because you're starting to enter into the parts of your education where you're going to really need to retain some substantive knowledge to go out and have these skills that workers or that employers want from their workers at a professional level. And so it's not just about being able to identify terms from the textbook. If I were teaching, and when I used to teach American National Government, for example, that was a 1,000 level course, and what we sort of wanted students to understand was that there were 3 branches of government, that we had a constitution, that Article 1 is the Congress, that you should be able to identify that, but not necessarily own it. In this class, it's more about owning it, and so it's an integration. It's not just about being able to take the term and identify the definition, but being able to apply it to a substantive example. And so, having said that, the tests tend to be more difficult in these, even though they're multiple choice. And so I make up for that by giving you these opportunities to get bonus points on the critical thinking challenges if you do really, really well. So, I noticed one person's already submitted their group project to the Dropbox. You're welcome to submit it again if you want after today's lecture until midnight tonight. And I think you may find that your thinking on this topic has maybe evolved after today's discussion on justice and sales. So that was the critical thinking challenge. Why should we study philosophy? So when we ask questions like what is justice, and what is it in relationship to selling, we're asking really a philosophical question. We're asking a question about philosophy. And a lot of business students say things like, what does philosophy have to do with business and marketing? Well, quite a bit. The highest degree, when you go and you get a doctor's degree in marketing, they don't give you a DMS or a Doctor of Marketing Science. You get the highest degree is the PhD, which stands for Doctor of Philosophy. And so the highest degree that you can get on a college campus is the PhD. It's sort of the pinnacle degree, and it's important. Why do we call it the Doctor of Philosophy? Well, because what we're seeking at an institutional level, and what we want scholars in the field to do is contribute to a body of knowledge, to contribute to influencing and furthering the study of the disciplines in which they are active in research. And so philosophy as an activity is really important in that it allows you to think really deeply and critically about these kinds of questions. And these questions, what I call the long debates, or perennial questions, have applied to all societies and all peoples and all academic disciplines at all times. So from the very beginning, the 3 great questions, or what I call the long debate, are the question of knowledge. What is it I can know, and how can I know it? This is not trivial. We think we know a lot of things, and we think we know in science a lot of things. And for example, there's a guy who is not an academic in marketing, but he's a practitioner of marketing. His name is Martin Lindstrom, and he writes a book called Biology. not biology as in the science of human or life studies, but biology is in the science of why people buy the things that we buy. And he makes a lot of arguments in this book that are pretty persuasive based on very sophisticated studies and analyses of the human mind using machines called fMRI. And I actually had a colleague at New Mexico State. We had an fMRI machine at New Mexico State. It was a joint venture between the College of Business and the College of Math and Science and the Department of Psychology over there. They bought this very sophisticated piece of equipment so that they could do studies on brain activities and watch what people are doing when they see certain things. And so Martin Lindstrom argues in biology that we can absolutely predict what people will buy and what they will like based on their brainwave activities. So for example, one of the studies, and it's a fairly compelling study to think about, that he looks at is these anti-smoking ads. Let's see if we can find one. On YouTube.
I want to give you a little bit of love getting ready in the morning. Lord, you there. Then you're heading with the bike. And now you're ready for the day.
What do y'all think when you see that ad? Probably shouldn't smoke. When they show these ads to smokers, the part of the brain that's triggered is the pleasure part of the brain, and they start jonesing for a cigarette. And so he argues that these ads are really not necessarily very effective because they're having the opposite impact. People actually want to go out and start smoking when they see this if they're a smoker. Now,
Or even non-smokers?
what I would say is the ad is not targeted at people who are smoking, probably. It's targeted at who? Non-smokers, to try and keep you from smoking. And smoking is decreasing among every group except one. And what's that group? Your age group. Why is that? That you all, every demographic, it's decreasing.
Smoking?
Except your young people. Why is smoking increasing among your age group?
It's increasing in our age groups?
Increasing.
Are you sure?
Every other demographic is decreasing. Your age group is increasing.
Cigarettes, or are we talking like vapes or
Cigarettes are actually increasing.
I used to work with people who would smoke, and like they would, when like people who didn't smoke would be like, oh, like they're doing it, so I'll do it. But I don't know if that's reason, but like that's why they started smoking, because they saw everyone else doing it.
I thought it like because people start out with vapes and then they do cigarettes.
A lot of people start out, a lot of young men actually start out with cigars because they think that's really sophisticated. Yeah,
All my roommates smoke cigarettes when they drink alcohol.
that's a
They
big
drink
one.
alcohol a lot.
Since the cigarette companies since they can't advertise anymore, they go out to bars and give away free, and lots of people actually don't smoke unless they're starting to drink, and then they light up. One of the things that they thought would happen in New York is when all the bars went non-smoking in the entire state, they thought that would impact the bars. It actually increased the bar patronage because there were people that would just avoid the bars. It's really actually kind of nice to go out to a bar in New York and not come home smelling like, you just walked out of a smoke den. So this question of knowledge, what is it we know? We think we're, for example, promoting these ads that we think are going to keep people from smoking, and maybe they don't, based on the science. It's not trivial. What can we know? We think we know a lot of things, but maybe we don't. Let me give you a very simple example, what is this that I'm touching? It's a table, are you sure about that? Why is it a table? Why is it a table? Okay, so only things that have chairs next to them are tables?
Because it looks like a table.
It's a table.
Because that's what we've been told.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a table.
You're sure this is a table?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like one.
I'm not sure that this is a table.
It is.
It could also be a desk.
It's a I think it's a desk, don't you? I think it's a desk.
No,
It's not a desk.
it's a table.
You're sure about that?
Yeah.
I did want it to be.
A desk you write on, a table you eat on, okay?
No.
What?
She was eating and riding on the
I
desk.
did homework.
She was eating and writing on the desk, so it's a
This is a table.
table desk?
I think it's too big.
So like the desk has.
So desks are small.
Yes.
Well, you traditionally a desk, but that's small desk. This
Not always.
Does a desk need drawers? So tables don't have drawers and desks do.
Not always.
Side tables have, I have a, in my home, I have a 300-year-old French country table. And at the end of it, it has a big drawer because that's where the French put their silverware. They stored it in the table. It was convenient, so it has a drawer. So does that make it a desk and not a table?
No,
No,
it's a table.
it's a table. But she just said desks have drawers.
Not all of them do.
Not all of them. So what makes this a table and not a desk? A desk is for a single, what about a partner's desk? A partner's desk. There are these desks, there are these things called partner's desks. So a partner's desk generally has, it's open, this was actually not a very good one. It's open between, and there are drawers on both sides of it, and they were made at the beginning of the 20th century because a lot of businesses were starting to become partnerships. And so you'd have two partners that could sit there and they could work together and have the same desk. So all desks are only made for one person, but they're partners' desks. Some tables have drawers. Some desks have drawers. Oh, so it depends on what I'm using it for. So now, I have transformed this magically from a table desk into a chair. Because I'm using it to sit down. Is that right?
It's a table.
I don't think it's a table. I think it's a desk. Are you really sure? Willing to stake your life on your answer that this is a table?
So you take it out of the classroom, you sit in a random room with no chairs, just right that. I think it's a table or a desk, and it's a table.
I mean, if there's this and a couch, I'm sitting on a couch.
If what?
If there's this and a couch, I'm sitting on a couch, because this is a table. You don't sit on it. Well, you can, but it's like on a chair.
Lots of professors sit on the tables, don't they?
But do they like their house?
You just sit yours.
Put your feet on it, does that make it an ottoman? I'm not sure. What is this?
It's a chair.
You're sure?
Yes.
Absolutely
I
positive
know
about
that is a chair.
You know that's a chair?
Yeah,
How do you know it's a chair?
because it's a chair.
Because that's
That's my only
not,
argument. I know it's a chair. It's a chair.
you know it's a chair. How do you know it's a chair?
Because it's right there and it's a chair.
It has a seat in the backrest.
Because that's what we've been taught it is.
Because what?
That's what we've been taught that it is.
Okay.
A separate seat for one person, typically with the back and four legs.
That has 5 legs.
Point.
That has 5 legs.
Typically. It's a word there.
Huh?
If we can't even decide on whether or not this is a table or a desk, how are we gonna know anything else, like really complicated stuff, like what is justice? How, if we can't even agree, because I'm not sure that this, I think you can make a really good argument that this is a desk. Because you're using it to write on, you're using it for the purpose of engaging in study, where you usually do that at a table, not, or a desk, not a table. So, these are not trivial questions. What is it when we ask questions in marketing research? What is it we can know and how can we know it? We think we know things, and maybe we are asking questions and we don't. I'll give you an example from my own research stream about asking questions. See if I can blow this up. Zoom. Can you read that? Can you all read it? Can you read it at the back? Okay. Look at question number 18. This is a widely tested instrument used to test ethics among business students and others. It's been used in a lot of disciplines, done by Donald Forsythe. There's a problem with question number 18. We've used this instrument a lot. I've used this in my own research. What's wrong with the question? If you get the right answer to what's wrong with the question, it's worth 10 bonus points to the student. That's what's wrong with the question.
Could it be stand in the way of other human relations and judgment?
What's wrong with that?
How can we judge other human relations?
It's not the problem. Yes?
But every human thinks differently. Why do you think?
Well, it's asking you how you feel.
But I mean,
So-
people feel different.
Well,
It cannot be targeted to the same people.
I think kind of depends on the location as what's ethical. In different societies and like different countries, like the Middle Eastern countries or our country, our ethics are way different than their ethics. So our better judgment days may be their bad judgment, so it might be the ethics change.
Okay. That question doesn't measure that. It doesn't really, that's not what it's asking. There's a problem to question. And I'm not going to disagree with that statement. And from a sociological perspective, but there's a problem with this question. And it goes to the question of knowledge and what somebody would think. Yes.
That ethics might not always be the right action for some person, for a certain person. You might think of the being ethical as different.
Okay, that's what it tries to test, is subjectivism. It tries to test whether or not we think that as an individual. But that doesn't go to the understanding of the question. How many of you have had research? Statistics? Okay. Should I call, yes?
Will you dumb down those words a little bit?
Will I dumb down those words?
Yeah.
Which word in particular?
Rigidly codifying ethical position.
Rigid means that it's not flexible, that it's one way or another, it's black or white. Codifying means putting it into legalistic terms like thou shall not. That's a code. And to codify it would be to write it down, to put it into some form of formal like statement, like a code of ethics or a law. What else?
Is it that it will stand in the way of like better human relations? Or?
Could, is what it says. So it may or may not. And it asks you to do this on what's called a Likert Scale. So a Likert Scale, you can have different points, but this, I think this one uses the 5-point scale. So it's it's strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree. And I'll tell you there's problems with this, strongly disagree. There's a problem with asking questions like this on a Likert scale. Some Likert scales don't have a neutral. They eliminate one. They force you into choosing because they say people will a lot of times choose the middle option even though they have an opinion, it just may not be strongly held. So for example, when we ask people questions about abortion, almost everybody, if you ask them if they're neutral on it, lots of men, for example, will say they're neutral when in fact they're not. They have an opinion. They kind of figure, I don't have to deal with that, so I'm not going to answer, and so they'll answer it. But almost everybody has an opinion. It may not be strongly held, but almost everybody has an opinion on abortion. It's just not one of those topics that you find people really say, I just don't care one way or another. You know, most people have an opinion on that. So even asking the question whether the neutral can, you know, most people are not totally neutral about anything. Do you like vanilla ice cream? Anybody like neutral? Like they just, most people, yeah, it's not my favorite, but you know, I kind of like it. It's better than no ice cream, isn't it? Unless, of course, you're lactose intolerant or something like that, in which case it maybe not. The problem with this question is that it asks what we call a double-barreled question. It's asking about two different things. It's asking about in the same question, human relations and adjustment. Human relations is different than being well-adjusted. You could be well-adjusted and not have great human relations. There are people who, they are loners. They don't really like a lot of people. They're scared and proud. But they may be well-adjusted. They may be happy and content to live a fairly solitary, they can't live totally alone like a hermit, but there are people that I know that don't have great relations, but I would say are probably, if we went through and gave them something called the Minnesota Multi-Phase Personality Inventory, on the whole, by and large, they would say that they're a well-adjusted person. They don't show signs of psychoses or sociopathology or things like that, that they are well-adjusted. They're just not good at human relations. Can you think of people that you know that are like that? On the other hand, you could be great at human relations and not well-adjusted. Lots of drunks are very good at they're the life of the party. How many of you know people like this? They get drunk and they're funny. And everybody likes them. And they're cute. They're not angry. I mean, there are people who get angry when they're drunk. And I've known people like this. That they're the happy drunk. I don't want them in my home because they're messy. But when I see them out at the bar, I think they're funny. You know, I enjoy the commentary. I don't want them puking all over my house. But, you know, to see them in the bar, yeah, they're funny. They're not mean or disagreeable. But I would say they're not well adjusted. Wouldn't you? They may have great human relations. They may even be very successful. There are high-functioning alcoholics who go to work, get up every day, go to a job. My ex-father-in-law was like this. He started drinking at 5 in the morning, but he got up every day and went to work. He drank, he just kept a container of a slushie of vodka and something in his car He had a business, and he was fun. He was never mean, he was never disagreeable, but I would say there's probably something wrong with somebody who needs, there is a chemical problem there, and so you might be not well adjusted and be great at human relations. So a lot of times we think we know what we're asking, and it turns out that maybe we don't. So it's not a trivial question, it's one that we should really consider. The second question is the question of conduct, what we call moral philosophy. Knowledge can be divided into two subcategories of philosophy. One is called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, what is it I can really know, and the other is metaphysics, what is reality, the study of reality. What is it that is real, and how can we know that? And so they're interrelated. The study of conduct or moral philosophy, and then the study of governance. And all of these have an impact, obviously, on sales. We have to know what our customers want in order to satisfy their needs. We shouldn't take advantage of them. That's moral philosophy. We should respect their autonomy and their right to make decisions for themselves. And governance, of course, plays a role because there are certain things that we can't do. In the United States, it is not illegal to advertise direct to the consumer pharmaceutical products. There's only one other nation that allows that. There are other nations that are rated by, we generally have a tendency to think that we are the freest nation on the planet. We're not, by the way. There are countries that are freer than we are, according to Freedom House, that have more individual liberties than we do, that have less restrictions on personal autonomy and decision-making than we do. So, for example, why are you shaking your head no? You think we're the freest country?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, in the Netherlands, prostitution is legal. They say, if you want to do that, that's a personal moral choice, and you have the right to do that. They're slightly more free. They don't have these restrictions on pornographic materials being sold that we have in this country, according to the Miller case, Miller versus California, which establishes a three-pronged test to determine whether or not you can sell certain items in certain areas based on an idea of community standards. And according to Freedom House, that makes the Netherlands slightly more free than we are. But in spite of the fact that they're slightly more free according to those scales that they use to determine whether or not they have individual liberty and freedom, they don't allow direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products in the Netherlands. They don't allow you to advertise Viagra on the TV or Prozac. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? The idea is that what happens in the United States as a result of this direct consumer advertising of pharmaceutical products? We have hordes of people running to their doctor. When your dog dies, you're probably going to be sad. I'm down to one dog. I had 7. They were all rescue animals that were dumped on me, and they all got old, and they have all, except for one, I'm down to one dog, passed away. And I can tell you that when each of them, I don't want any more dogs, by the way, so please don't give me any, don't drop off any dogs in my house, because it's just enormously difficult to deal with the loss. I don't have children. And so it's just horrible when you have to lose a dog. And you're going to be sad. Does that mean you should run to the doctor and ask for the bottle of pills? No, that's sort of a normal human emotion, but we have a tendency to do that in this country as a result of direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals. We have more people on antidepressants in this nation than any other Western nation. We have more people. Why do we have an opioid addiction problem in this country? More than any other nation. Because if you were in pain, you ran to your doctor and demand that they give you what? Oxycontin. It's a problem. And so governance obviously affects this. What can we sell? Can we sell direct to the consumer? In this country, we can sell direct to the consumer all kinds of pharmaceuticals that they cannot sell in other places. They have to go through a doctor, and they don't overprescribe the way they do in the United States, largely as a result of the fact that they don't have the insurance problems that we have in this country. How much time, in other countries where they have socialized medicine, doctors actually take time to get to know you because they're not paid based on the number of people that they run in and out. If you want to make money as a physician, how much time can they spend with you? How many of you have gone to your doctor recently?
One on Monday,
You went on Monday. How much time did they spend?
15 minutes.
10 minutes. That's a long time. The average is 5 minutes. If they want to make money, they can spend 5 minutes or less with you. And you can't go in. When I was a kid growing up, you could go in and you could say, oh, I've got this chest cold and my toe hurts, and you know, and they would sort of, and it's like, oh, nope, got to make another appointment for that. The form only allows me to check one diagnosis per visit to get paid by insurance. And so that's not necessarily a really wonderful thing, but it's an obvious either limitation or plus, depending on how you look at it, in terms of the governance that we have. And so it's obviously important in this study of what is moral. A lot of textbooks will tell you, and almost every single one of them says this, and it's just categorically wrong, that the law is an acceptable moral minimum. That the law is the base, and that is not true. That is absolutely just wrong. The law itself, the law is important, and we should certainly consider the law, and they may overlap. So you may have the law, there are parts of the law, so you may have the law and morality, and they may have some overlap here. But there are parts of the law that may be completely amoral, that have to do with sale. So for example, in the sale of goods, the UCC defines what a sale of goods are, and it applies to all kinds of things. And as a salesperson, you will have to deal, probably, if you're going to go out and sell product with the UCC. And it does things like, it fills in, it has gap-stopping provisions in the UCC. So one of the gap-stopping provisions in the UCC is, who bears the risk of loss once the goods are put into transport? So you order goods. Lots of people do this. I can give you a good example of this. How many of you know where the Variance Tower is on the corner of Northwest Expressway and I-44? You've seen that, okay. That started out as the Penn Square Bank building in the 1980s. If you want to read a good sort of history of Oklahoma and its impact on the national economy, read a book called Funny Money. Penn Square Bank was this tiny little bank. The building that they were originally in is still in the northwest corner of Penn Square Mall's parking lot. That bank over there was where they started out. Penn Square started out, and they were making loans, millions and millions of dollars worth of loans to all kinds of wildcatters during the 1980s. And they got really, really big, and they built what was going to be the Penn Square Bank Tower over there, which is now the Variance Bank Tower. When they were building it, the contractor ordered all the glass for that beautiful tower, and he didn't take out insurance on it. And the contract was silent as to whether or not he bore the risk of loss. A shipment of that glass was damaged and destroyed by a tornado. And he sued the manufacturer saying, well, you need to replace the glass. And they said, they turned to the UCC, and the UCC says that if a contract for the sale of goods is silent as to who bears the risk of loss, the risk of loss passes from seller to buyer when they are placed in the stream of commerce in a common carrier. That means that if you didn't want the risk of loss to pass, you needed to specify in the contract buyer that you wanted it to be FOB, which stands for free on board buyer's bill. But if you don't, you bear the risk of loss. That is completely immoral. Why does the UCC decide one person bears the risk? It's a flip of the coin. The National Conference of Commissioners of Uniform State Laws just flipped a coin and decided that, you know, if a contract for a sale of goods was silent on who bears the risk of loss once it enters into the stream of commerce through a common carrier, we'll just, that's amoral. There's no moral consideration to that, really. Is it? Is there any big moral problem? No, there's really not. So the law itself may not have moral import. The law itself may be immoral. For a long period of time in this country, if you were African American, you could not sit in this classroom. You couldn't eat at a lunch counter with Caucasians. That law was itself immoral. The law itself may be immoral. And it took people disregarding that law and engaging in what we call as civil disobedience to get that law overturned. So the law is an important consideration, but it is not necessarily an acceptable moral minimum. And it's one of the things that we have to consider when we think about morality and the study of right and wrong in relationship to sales and marketing. These are examples of things that impacted sales and marketing, which, by the way, doing away with Jim Crow was overall good for business, and it was good for sales, wasn't it? Because it meant that you had a new market. It took people a while to realize that. Took them some time. But it's overall been, it's better for the economy if you have people that are fully integrated into the economy and are productive than if they are not. So these are important considerations. The question of knowledge, the question of conduct, and the question of governance, which we call, of course, political science. So there are some challenges to philosophical ethics, and we saw these in the things that you all came up with. And by challenges, these are not valid ethical positions, but we have to think about them because they are enormously attractive, and we see them being used by business people all the time. The first challenge to ethics, or philosophical ethics, which is not a valid ethical theory, and so on test questions and on essays you might be asked, to support your argument with a valid ethical theory, you cannot use subjectivism. Subjectivism relies on a philosophical concept called solipsism. And solipsism says that the self is all one can know. Now this is important for us as salespeople because, again, we talk a lot about empathy and the ability to empathize with our customer, to put yourself in their shoes. And can you ever really do that? It's really, really hard to do that. Because no two people's experiences are ever exactly identical. Are they? You all are made up of a million different unique experiences. From me. I would be willing to bet that some of you have somewhat similar backgrounds to mine. But they're not exact. And so empathy becomes really, really difficult. Can you ever really know what it is to be someone else? So subjectivism says that morality and ethics are up to the individual. It's what I believe to be correct. And this seems intuitively appealing because if we ask you about things like, for example, really hard questions, we would probably have a lot of different answers. Should we market? Should we be able to sell? One of the things that became enormously popular and that they've started marketing is a drug that started, it originally was, I think, legalized first in France, and now they have sold it in the United States. It finally became legal in the United States, and the drug was originally called RU486. And what RU486 is it's called the morning after pill in many instances. So if you have unprotected sexual intercourse and you think you may be pregnant, you take this pill, and it causes spontaneous abortion. It's different than other birth control devices in that if you get pregnant and you have implantation, it will cause an automatic shedding of the uterine wall. Should we be allowed to market and sell that? If you believe that life begins at conception, should you be allowed to market and sell that? Nobody has an opinion on this?
It's full of stigmas.
It depends who you are.
Because not everyone has the same beliefs.
Not everyone has the same beliefs. You can see how attractive this idea is that if we ask these tough questions, like, should you be able to market abortion services? So there's RU 486. Technically speaking, historically, traditional birth control, the difference between RU 486 and traditional birth control is not that much. Traditional birth control did not stop the fertile, as I understand it, I'm not a medical doctor, but as I've talked to medical doctors who assured me that my understanding of this is correct, the original birth control pill did not stop necessarily the fertilization of an ovum. It stopped the implantation of the ovum on the uterine wall. So technically you still have conception, but you have spontaneous abortion in the shedding of that uterine wall and the prevention of the implantation of the ovum onto the uterine wall. What RU486, from my understanding again, is that what it does is, traditional birth control is you have to take it every day. And if you miss it, it may not be effective. What's the difference between that and RU486? Well, RU486 allows you to, within a period of time, take the pill and cause shedding of the wall. Should we be able to market that? I don't know. It's a really tough question, isn't it?
What happened after they started normal, like birth control and after Plan B was, you can see what happens to the population.
Okay. Well, if we're going to base it on that, maybe we should insist that people have to apply and get a license. We live on a planet that can comfortably support 3 billion people. We now have how many? 7. We are doing colossal damage to our environment. Maybe we should restrict life.
Well, I looked what China did, but the genocide of girls, like the amount of daughters that were killed in China between the 80s and 2000s was more than the Holocaust and other.
Yes, that's what China did. Absolutely.
But it didn't keep them from getting pregnant, so a lot of times they did abortions or killed babies and never did it born.
Yeah,
So.
that sounds absolutely horrific, doesn't it? So you can see why subjectivism is attractive. Because it doesn't seem that we can know any of these really tough questions, what we might call a priori. This is something that we can know without experience. What can we know a priori? Now, a lot of people that subscribe to subjectivism say this is not like math. This looks really difficult if I give you lowercase sigma equals the square root of uppercase sigma xi minus the Greek letter mu squared over n. That looks really, really complicated. What is that? The mean would be sigma xi over n. So what is this over here? For those of you who've had statistics, this should come tripping off your tongue. It's the standard deviation. Yeah, it's the standard deviation for a population. If I said sigma squared equals xi minus the mu squared over n, you'd have something called the variance. We usually don't use these because normally, particularly in marketing, what we're dealing with is we're dealing with samples. So what you usually have is you have S equals the square root of E xi minus x bar over n minus 1 because you lose 1 degree of freedom for the sample. Now the reason I show this to you is because these formulas are impressive, I guess. They're kind of child's play if you're a physicist. But if I give you a data set, a set of numbers, and I say calculate the standard deviation and you follow the formula, we should all come up with the same answer. Shouldn't we? If we don't, there's a problem and we can figure out who went wrong and where they went wrong by looking at how they did the math. But we should all come up with the same answer. If you have a financial calculator, you can calculate standard deviations. How many of you have an HP 12B2? It's a financial calculator, that's probably the best one. You can calculate this stuff relatively easily. Even though it looks difficult, it's really not if you understand the order of operations and what the symbols mean. Ethics doesn't seem to be like that. But what I would tell you is that even in physics, Stephen Hawking is now rethinking some of his theories. Or his ideas and his proofs. There are debates even there. So the fact that we can't come up with maybe a common agreement on really hard things, like when does life begin, doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about it and that we shouldn't try that subjectivism is true. And there are things that we can know a priori, as opposed to a posteriori, which is knowledge that has to be gained from experience. A posteriori knowledge is knowledge like how to ride a bicycle. Nobody intuitively knows how to ride a bicycle. You got on a bicycle when you were a little kid, and you probably, my parents were cruel. They didn't believe in training wheels. Falling down will encourage you to learn faster. And it did. You fall down a couple times and you get this pretty quickly. Nobody knows that intuitively. You have to learn it from experience. Are there things that we can know without experiencing them? I think there are. In Candide, Voltaire talks about this old woman that Candide meets along the way, and they try to outdo each other on how bad their lives are. And Candide says that he's had the worst life, and his girlfriend Cunegonde says, no, I've had a worse life. And the old woman says, well, sir, if you'd known my life, you wouldn't say such things. It turns out that the old woman, who's horrible and ugly, and her nose touches her chin, which, by the way, your nose and your ears are two parts that continue, because they're not made out of bone. They continue to grow throughout your life, which is why old men have really big noses and big ears, because they're made out of cartilage. And so they continue to grow throughout your entire life. Turns out that she was the daughter of a pope. Needless to say, popes aren't supposed to have daughters, and she was set to be married. But she's kidnapped along the way on a ship that she's aboard. She's set to be married to a prince. She's kidnapped by a bunch of pirates, and she goes through all of these things. At one point, they're starving to death, and they decide to cut off half of her buttocks so that they can eat it and not die. And she's sold into slavery, and she goes through all these trials and tribulations. And she says at the end of that, And yet, as horrible and wretched as my life became, I went on loving life. Perhaps it's our most idiotic, fatal tendency to constantly cling to that thing which we would want to throw off. We don't have to experience death to know that we don't want it, do we? I think we can know this a priori. So we can come down to at least one thing that we can say, I don't have to experience that to know. And from there we can build on others. Like, you probably don't want to be enslaved. You know, you don't want a lot of things done to you. Now, it may turn out that I want things done to me that you don't want done to you. So the golden rule, a lot of people say, well, we can just follow the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That doesn't always work. It works a lot of the time. If you state it negatively, it works better. In the 1st century CE, the great rabbinic scholar Hillel was approached by a pagan who said that he would convert to Judaism if the great man could teach him the whole of the Torah while standing on one leg. And Hillel replied, that which is hateful to yourself, do not unto your fellow man. That is the entirety of the Bible. The rest is but commentary. Go and learn it. If you state it negatively, it works almost all the time. So I think we can come up with things that we know a priori. Now, another challenge to ethics is called cultural relativism. This says ethics are not individually based. Obviously, if we allowed each individual to decide for him or herself what was going to be ethical and legal and moral, we could never have a society. This would be in what Hobbes calls, in the Leviathan, the war of all against all. Hobbes discusses the state of nature, and we know from the anthropological and archaeological record that this state did exist at one point in time, that there was a primitive psyche before man was social. And in that state of nature, Hobbes imagines the most brutish of existences. He says in this state, now I used to, as a younger person, I used to think, this would be great, I don't need the law, we can have anarchy. I know who the evildoers are and I should be able to do away with them. All little boys feel this way, by the way. All little boys have aggression issues, and that's a normal part of development. That you think that you know who the evildoers are and that you should be able to take them out. They're usually people that have done something to you. Well, in this state of nature, you could do that. The problem is that at some point, you won't be the strongest man on the block or woman on the block. And so Hobbes in Leviathan says we give up some of our ability to do whatever we want in order to form societies. And that's the basis of our morality, which leads to cultural relativism. Cultural relativism. And that's what Hobbes would say, is that morality is not individually based. We couldn't say that. If we let everybody do what they wanted, we couldn't sit here in this building and get an education and have a society, could we? We couldn't work together and cooperate. Because I would be constantly afraid of what? Of you. That you might take my stuff. I would hoard my stuff and keep it, and I would not want you to interfere with my stuff. And so we couldn't, so Hobbes says we give up some of this stuff and some of our freedoms in order to form societies. Businesses use this all the time as a justification to engage in less than ethical practices. They say, look, it's not individualistic, but there are different societies, different places at different locations have different ideas about, and who are we to say that that's wrong? And this is, again, attractive, because if we look out there, we see a lot of different practices. In the United States, generally speaking, by and large, on the whole, although not always, we have said that men and women are equal. That they should have the same abilities to do and achieve and grow and develop. That's not true in all societies, is it? How many of you ladies drove here today? All of you. Can you do that in Saudi Arabia?
Now you can.
Now, we're at what year? We're at 2018. And women in Saudi Arabia are just now getting the right to drive. And so a cultural relativist would say that's society. Who are we to judge them? In some societies, they require bribery. If you want to do business in certain nations, you're going to pay bribes to officials in order to get the permits that you need. This has been made illegal in the United States under something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And a lot of our businesses say, look, this really hampers our ability to do business in these locations. Because it's expected in those countries that you will pay a bribe in order to do business, and you are limiting us. So what do they do to get around it? Well, they become non-American corporations. The problem is that it still applies to American business. If you are an American citizen, you can't do this. And we've had some people that have given up their American citizenship. I think one of the founders of Facebook has actually renounced his American citizenship. If you all saw the movie about the founding of Facebook, he was sort of the manager of it in the early days of Facebook. I can't remember what his name was. But I think he's actually given up his American citizenship because he thinks that it's somewhat limiting in business. Not a lot of people do that, but some do. More people want American citizenship. Rupert Murdoch, for example, was not born in America, but he's become an American citizen. So, who are we to say that that's bad? And this, again, if we look at what's going on out there, this seems to be true. The ancient Eskimos, I'm told, were nomadic. What did they live off of? Well, they lived off fishing, seals, and caribou, which meant that you did what? You lived around. When one member of the tribe couldn't keep up anymore, back in olden days, they just put them out on the ice floe. See ya, Grandma. Nice knowing you. Sounds barbaric, doesn't it? We treat our frail elderly so much better. We put them in these wonderful places that reek of urine, and they get bed sores and are maybe mistreated. But hey, we're not putting them out on an ice floe. They're called nursing homes. How many of you visited one? They're not pleasant places to be. So we see lots of variance. Well, what can we say to that? Well, cultural relativists rely on this idea that there are no a priori truths. But in fact, it turns out that there are things that we can find in all societies, in all places, at all times that have applied. So we can dispense with the cultural relativist notion. What are those three things? Well, in all societies, in all places, at all times, we have had a prohibition against killing members of the in-group. So in all places, the first rule that we can find among all societies is a prohibition against killing members of the in-group. Now, ancient societies or less civilized societies will allow you to kill members, indiscriminately kill members of the out-group. You can kill those people over there. You can't kill indiscriminately members of the in-group. Now, there are exceptions to the prohibition, but they are rigidly, generally limited. What's an exception to the prohibition against killing members of the in-group? You can generally kill amongst all societies in all places at all times. You can generally kill a member of the in-group if it is in self-defense. If it's in your own self-defense, or if it's in the defense of others. But you can't just willy-nilly come in and decide, I can't bring my .357 Magnum and decide that you're going to sleep in my class morally offends me, and so justice will be quick, and I will smite you, and blam, you're gone. That's not going to work. Now, as we become more sophisticated, we've extended those to members of the out-group. We no longer say, you can't kill the Canadians as they come running across the border. Of course, the Canadians are not running across the border, right, in hordes and masses. But you can't kill the Canadians. You can't kill other people that come here from other places. There is a prohibition against bearing false witness, against what you think members of the in-group. So you can't lie about members of the in-group. Now, you may be able to do it about members of the out-group, but you can't do it against members of the in-group. And then finally, you can't steal from members of the in-group. Now, you have to be careful on this one. Because there are some societies that live more communally than we do. But even in those communal societies, so for example, the little San people of sub-Saharan Africa, there's a rather old movie now, some of you may have seen it, it's a very sweet movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy. Has anybody seen this movie? You've actually seen it? So what's this movie about?
It's like some water bottle falls from the sky.
A Coke bottle.
Yeah.
An old-fashioned Coke bottle, which are making a comeback. Yeah.
And I don't really remember much, but I think they start like fighting over it.
These people, they live a very communal life, they have everything that they need, and they share everything, well, except for things like, they have their own beads and their own clothing, and you don't go and steal somebody's beads or their clothing, but for the most part, they share everything. And then they come upon this one item that is enormously useful. It's an old-fashioned Coke bottle, which are making a comeback now, and everybody they only have one of these, and it becomes a competition, whereas everything else, they have an abundance that they need in living in sub-Saharan Africa. Now they have this one thing, and so the chief tries to get rid of this Coke bottle, and it keeps coming back. No matter what he does, the Coke bottle keeps coming back. It's thrown out of an airplane, and it keeps coming back, and it creates problems. So they have a communal society, so you can't say that you have to be careful on this third one, but basically you don't take somebody else's beads, you don't take their clothing, you don't take the things that are their personal possessions, even though they live more communally. So what we can say is that cultural relativism is by its nature false, because we can find at least 3 rules that apply to all societies in all places at all times. And we can find many more that are becoming more accepted. Prohibitions against child labor. Now, what economists will argue, people like Milton Friedman and others will say, look, part of development is the use of child labor. As those societies become more advanced, they will stop using child labor. But we have to recognize that these things are part of the development process. I would refer Friedman and others back to the statement by Socrates in Republic, when he's forced to admit that his ideal society will never come into existence, in that you don't need the philosopher to tell you what is going on. That's the business of somebody else. That's the business of the sociologist or the psychologist or the political scientist. You need the philosopher to tell you what's the best that you can become. And I think that's worth thinking about. So we can find at least 3 things that are that we can apply to all places and all people at all times. And I think that dispenses with cultural relativism, but we can find many more that are becoming much more agreed upon. the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which everybody has signed, even North Korea and even China have signed on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and so I think we're accepting more and more. Now, these two sound correct, although we've dispensed with them the idea that we can't let everybody just decide what they want, because if we did, we couldn't at some level even exist in this society, in this room. We couldn't get along. Cultural relativism, well, if we accepted cultural relativism as true, we could never have said that Nazi Germany was wrong and that we could never let it happen again. We would just have, that's their culture. No, we can't accept that, right? This next one doesn't sound correct, but is actually, of the three, the more difficult to deal with. This third one says that either as a result of nature or nurture or a combination of the two, we can't help but act the way that we act. You think that you have free will, but you don't. You think you do, but you don't. I see some of you rolling your eyes. What makes the biologists will be horrified at my stripping down of their science? What makes a male Homo sapien a male as opposed to a female? What are females? Genetically.
There's two X
There are two X chromosomes, XX, and males are XY. Right? Males are XY. So I want everyone in here who has a Y chromosome to raise your hand. If you have a Y chromosome, raise your hand. Raise it high. Don't be shy. If you have a Y chromosome, raise your hand. Oh, yeah, good. Thank you. Now, why did you do that? You thought you had free will. You thought you could. I even got the gentleman on the back row to raise his hand. You thought you had free will, but did you? You all raised your hand. If you didn't, the person sitting next to you might, not sure. Question much lately? You raised your hand. Why did you do that? Well, I don't know. Because you have a Y chromosome. Because you're programmed to do, basically from a very early age, societally you're told to do what the teacher tells you to do. You stand in line. You learn this in kindergarten, right? Stand in line, line up, raise your hand to speak. You learn these things. You're culturally, and you can't necessarily help it. Now, in a very simple experiment, like, everybody who has a Y chromosome, raise your hand, you think, oh, well, that you tricked me. But where it really matters, I have free will. But do you? You think, in this little simple experiment, you tricked me. You got me. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, what? Shame on me. And you think, so you fooled me once, but I won't be fooled again. And when it really matters, I have free will. Do you? Can you will yourself to not want something? Who said yes? You think you can will yourself to not want something?
Yes.
Really? What is it that you really have wanted?
Like me personally?
Yeah, you personally.
I don't know. My TV.
Your TV?
I really want my TV.
You really, what kind of TV do you have?
It's a Sony.
It's a Sony Curve?
It's not curved, but it's 4K.
Okay, all right. What makes that such a great TV?
Oh, it looks really good.
It looks really good. Does it look like you can walk into the picture? Yeah, my brother's got this curved TV that's this big, it's like, it's crazy, yeah. Insane. You got it.
Yeah, but I could have not gotten it.
Really?
But I think so.
You could have willed yourself to not want that.
Yeah,
Then why did you get it?
because I have the money. But if I didn't have the money and I had saved up, then I could have built myself to not want it, because there's no sense in wanting it if you can't get it, so why not?
Really, you think you can will yourself to stop wanting it?
I think so.
Yes.
I think alcoholics do all the time.
They will themselves to not drink.
Right. I think eventually you have to figure it out why.
But they don't drink, but they still want it.
I don't know, I think it's easy to talk yourself out of something. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I do it all, I mean, I can't think of it right now, but like, you just make it sound bad in your mind, like, oh, I'm broke, and oh, like, if I do this, it's gonna be like flashy, or, you know, you just give yourself reasons why you don't want that, and then you just don't want it.
Ah,
People who are
but
losing
did you want something else more?
Yeah.
You wanted your money more than you wanted the television,
But that's
but
not
did
the
you
same
will
question.
yourself to want that either? Did you have the power, I mean, like, I want to eat Outback 3 meals a day. I can't because I wouldn't fit through the door if I ate the bloomin' onion and the Outback special and the baked potato and the Caesar salad and the chocolate thunder from down under, which is, I'm like, when I go, it's like all of it, and I'm just like, I sit there and I can eat. I have done, I could not because I can't stand shrimp. I could not win at the Big Texan, that's where you get the free 72-ounce steak if you eat it within an hour. But I've eaten the 72-ounce steak. I just couldn't, there's rules to this. You can't just eat the steak. You have to eat the salad, the baked potato, the shrimp cocktail, and the steak. And I got through everything except the shrimp cocktail because I just, I can't stand shrimp. It's a texture issue. I have something called sensory integration disorder, which means I have a visceral reaction to certain textures, feels, smells, things like that. And so,
So it sounds so extra, like.
What?
This is. That's not a mean, but I mean like rice, like you get like weird reactions to like random foods.
There are something, like I can't, when I was a little kid, there were things I couldn't wear. I wouldn't wear jeans because they were too stiff. All my sheets had to be washed 4 or 5 times before I could get it, and they had to have extra softener in them, because I couldn't wear them. I didn't like anything that was restrictive. Or, you know, I mean, I would throw up. I'm a sympathetic, lots of people are slightly, since I have slightly, if I see somebody, I mean, like, I wanted to be a medical doctor, but like, if somebody throws up in front of me, I'm like throwing up. It's just like an instant reaction. I'm a sympathetic vomiter. So, I didn't like the shrimp, but I could eat I mean, I can eat a lot of food. I mean, my brother refers to me as Devour Boy. Because I can eat just voluminous amounts of food. But I don't eat that way because I want something else more. But I didn't will myself to want that something else more either. I mean, I want to live, to be older than, 45. I saw a card the other day. It was from Larry the Cable Guy. It was for Father's Day. It was last Father's Day when it came around. And it was one that had lights and sound and stuff. And it said, "My daddy smoked and drank Jack Daniel's whiskey and ate chicken fried steak 3 meals a day. And he lived to a happy, ripe old age of 47. I would love to do that, but I want something else more, which is I want to live beyond a ripe old age of 40, because I'm rapidly approaching that point in my life. And I'm out of time, so we'll pick up with this and finish it next time and move on. So you have until this evening to turn those in.